For you I live, and for you I breathe. I just wanna please you, 'cause Lord, I love you. And when this earth shall pass away, Lord, I wanna hear you
Hello
say,
and welcome to another
well
episode from SOS
done.
Ministries. As always, we're grateful that God would have it so that you could join us here today for a word. And I pray that the next few moments you spend with us will be time well spent, and that you will find a word, glory be to God, that would lift your spirits, a word that would encourage your heart, a word that would just put a new fire, a new zeal, a new perspective in your season right now. And I just pray that it will continue to be like fuel to your soul so that you continue to walk this walk of faith, to fight this good fight, and to keep on pressing, because life can be overwhelming, life can be rough, life can be so hard sometimes. And sometimes all we need is a word from God to just remind us that God is here. God hasn't forgotten us. God is in our situation. He's present in this season, and that He has a plan and a purpose. So I pray that this word is like fuel for you, and that it will just help you in whatever season you are. So today we're going to be looking at a familiar Bible passage, and I say everything is familiar because I feel like everything I say is familiar and is more of a reminder than anything groundbreaking. But sometimes that's what we need, a reminder. And today we're going to be talking about blessings in affliction. Blessings in affliction. Blessings in affliction. And we're going to look at Genesis chapter 41, verse 52. It's a very familiar story, the story of Joseph. And as always, I really do encourage you to read the entire thing, the entire account of the life of Joseph, the entire Bible. Is so beautiful and profound. And in order to get, I mean, I might be touching on some summaries here and there, but in order to get the fullness of the life of Joseph and the path that God led him through, you do have to read the book yourself. But today we're going to look at one verse, Genesis chapter 41, verse 52. And it says, and he called and the second he, which is Joseph. So and the second Joseph called Ephraim. So he called his second son Ephraim, which means to be fruitful. For he said, God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Glory be to God. He says, God has caused me to be fruitful even in the land of my affliction. God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction, not after the land of my affliction. He didn't take me out of the land of my affliction to make me fruitful. He says, God has caused me to be fruitful even in God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And this is a profound word for somebody today who's going through a season of affliction, who's going through a season of trial and turmoil and pain, who's going through a season of loss and abandonment and rejection and whatever it is. And Joseph experienced all that. Yet, as he testifies when we meet him, he says, God has caused me to be fruitful even in this place of affliction. You see, we all know the story, but by the time we meet Joseph in this verse, his wife has given birth to their second son in the land of Egypt, and he calls his name Ephraim. And if we look closely on the life of Joseph, because he says, I'm going to call him Ephraim because God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And if we look closely on the life of Joseph, we can see the truth of that statement was not just something in that moment, but Joseph's entire life is a testimony that God allowed him to be fruitful, that God allowed him to be blessed. God blessed him and favored him even in his place of affliction. In the midst of affliction, God blessed him. In the midst of affliction, God blessed him. If we think about where he was coming from, the very time we met him in his home, Joseph was the son of Jacob. And Joseph's siblings hated him. Even his home was a place of affliction. Ever felt like that? Where it feels like your home is a place of affliction. Your loved ones, maybe it's work, is a place of affliction. So even that was a place of affliction. But God, in his grace and in his mercy, because his brothers hated him, I'm sure his brothers' mothers hated him, and he was living and sleeping and eating essentially with the enemy. But even in that, he was blessed and had favor because God's covering was over him. His father, he was a favorite of his father, and I'm sure that saved him from a lot of turmoil. Imagine that when we are in affliction, even in our at our workplaces, at our homes, on the job, maybe in our congregation or wherever it is we may find ourselves, remember that we can be blessed even there because we have the covering and the protection and the favor of the Almighty God upon our lives. Even in the midst of your enemies, God will bless you. And then after that, Joseph was plotted against. His brothers plotted against him to kill him. But he was blessed and favored because instead of killing him, God turned it around so that they would sell him into slavery. So even in that, God blessed him and God covered him. Glory be to God. The original plan was to kill him, but God covered him and allowed them to sell him instead. And sometimes the enemy makes a play against our life. Sometimes the enemy comes up against us with something that should cause us death, but God in his grace blesses us and shifts us into strategic places. God shifts us from death, glory be to God, and places us in a different situation. It may not be what you came from, but it isn't what the enemy had planned for you because God has blessed you. And then Joseph found himself, in slavery. He was essentially sold to Potiphar. But imagine that, because that was a blessing. Because he could have been sold to some unscrupulous character. He could have been sold to some horrible owner, but he was sold to the head of the king's guard, the captain of the king's guard. And if you think about it, that's not a bad place to land, because God blessed him even there, that he was no ordinary slave, but he became the head of Potiphar's household. Are you blessed in your place in the land of your affliction? How has God blessed you? Sometimes we get so caught up with how bad things are that we don't see the blessings and the favor and the grace of God that is sprinkled all over our hard places. We don't always take time out to recognize and to be grateful for the blessings that God bestows upon us even in our most difficult times. He ended up in the as the leader, the head of the household of the captain of the king's guard. But it wasn't his final destination. God wasn't through with him yet. So what happened in that moment was that he experienced more loss. He was lied on, glory be to God, and he lost, the respect of Potiphar. He lost his reputation. He went from being a respectable man to being an accused attempted rapist, and he was demoted. He was sent to prison. More affliction, but there he received the blessings as well, because God allowed him to be the head over the other prisoners, because everywhere, even in affliction, everywhere that Joseph was, God chose to bless him there. God chose to favor him there. God chose to elevate him. God chose to set him, glory be to God, and cause him to land in a soft place, to set him in a place of blessings and favor, even in the land of his affliction. The truth is, I believe that the only reason that Joseph had a season at Potiphar's house was so that he could end up in the king's prison. You see, where Joseph ended up doing time wasn't in the regular prison. It was in a prison that was specially dedicated to the king's prisoners. So not any prisoner would end up in that prison. Only the king's prisoners would go there. And obviously, because he was working for the captain of the king's guard, then he ended up in the king's prison. Why? Because he really had a divine appointment with destiny. He had to meet the king's baker and his cupbearer. He had to have that appointment with purpose. He had to meet them. He had to, glory be to God, had that encounter that would be his ticket out into a place of promotion. Sometimes when we are in our dark places and when we are in our valleys, we imagine that God has forgotten us. We think it's over. We feel like we've lost everything, and we don't recognize that even our valleys were mapped out by God. Even our valleys, even our hard places were ordained by God. We don't always recognize that the things that we're going through are sprinkled with blessings from God. He never leaves us completely dry and empty. If we would look at the things that God allows us to still have, even in the midst of our hard places, we would see that truly it is the blessings and the grace and the favor of God upon our lives. Even when it feels that we're losing everything, God sets us up in such a way that there are blessings in our trials. We are never abandoned in our difficult situations. We are never abandoned when we're going through the valley. God is always with us, and he knows why he allows us to go through different situations. You see, God gave Joseph a dream, and we know that his parents and his brothers were going to bow. That's what the dream said. And Joseph believed that, and we believe that. What we don't always recognize, or what we don't always, give enough value to, is that God may show us sometimes glimpses of where he wants to take us, but he doesn't always show us how he's going to get us there. Sometimes he will reveal the destination, but he will conceal the process. And even when he's concealing the process, we must believe that what he says, where he says he's leading us, even when the path doesn't really make sense to us, we must trust and believe that what he's doing will work together in our lives for good. We must trust and believe that somehow our dark places, somehow our valley experiences, somehow our wilderness places are working together. They will work together somehow for our good and for God's glory. He had to be thrown into the pit. You had to go through what you went through. He had to be sold into slavery. You had to be betrayed. You had to be, to be rejected. You had to experience that so that you could know and understand God in a unique way, in a powerful way. Will he not make it worth your while? He most definitely will. And he already is doing it. A lot of times we just refuse to see it because we hold on so much to where we've been that we lose sight, or we lose this present moment and just walking in the fullness of God and what he has for us in this moment, because we're so caught up with where we have been. To be promoted to the king's house, Joseph had to be kicked out from the king's guard's house. To be promoted to, to Pharaoh's house, to become the who God really ordained for him to be, he had to be sold into slavery. He had to be lied on and misused. He had to get out, and God was going to get him out to fulfill his purpose one way or another. And if that's the path God chooses, then who are we to contend with God? His ways are the best, even when we don't understand it. And I'm just so amazed by the fact that even in his suffering, God allowed him to be fruitful. Even in the land of your suffering, please recognize that God is blessing you even there. Sometimes we feel like we cannot grow where we are. Sometimes we feel like we need to get out of where we are before we can do anything, before we can be anything, before we can walk in the way of God, before we can be a blessing, we feel like we need to get out of where we are. But God is saying, right where you are, I have blessed you. Right where you are, I have favored you. Right where you are, I have mapped out a way for you to bear fruit. Right where you are, you don't need to get out of the valley or the wilderness to bear fruit. I will make you bear fruit, even in dry places, even in the wilderness. I am doing a thing in your life. You just have to see. I know it's hard. I know it hurts. I know it's painful. I know it feels unbearable, but I promise you that I am working it out for your good and for my glory. We don't always understand the way that God takes. And we don't always see anything, the good things coming from the season or the place that we are in. We're not always able to fathom that we can be blessed in the midst of our hurt and in our pain and in our disappointment and in our suffering. But I just want to tell you today that just because your mind cannot imagine it doesn't mean that God's hand cannot do it. Be open to how God is making you fruitful and is blessing you in this season. God's hand can do just what you need. He can do what he says he can do. Even where you are right now, even in the midst of your pain and hurt, God can cause you to be fruitful. God can produce abundant fruit. Don't lose hope. Don't lose heart. God is always up to something. Trust him to bring fruit in your dry and hard season. Trust him to do exceedingly and abundantly above what you could ask or think, even in the land of your affliction. God, God is making you fruitful even in the land of your affliction. What he did for Joseph, he is able to and he is doing for you. Trust God. Don't lose hope. Don't lose heart. Even in hard and dry places, God is present and God is blessing you. God bless you. I love you. May you find strength and grace to go through whatever it is that you're going through. May you recognize that God will never leave you nor will he ever forsake you. May you recognize that he's always there with you, and may you see the way that he's just blessing you in incredible and profound ways. God bless you, and I love you. Until next time from SOS Ministries.
Well done.